Hello, everybody. I'm Anaji, and we are back with the monthly installment of the Watchlist March 2021. So yeah, this is just going to be little short mini reviews of just things I've been enjoying or been watching and consuming, and I wanted to share it with y'all. So let's start off with the first one. Train to Busan Peninsula. So I was a big fan of the Train to Busan movie that came out, I think like 4 or 5 years ago. I'm not gonna lie right now, like Korean cinema, they've really stepped onto the world stage. I think Koreans have some really interesting cinema. Their stuff it kind of is an interesting blend of like Eastern and Western influences, where they still have some of that Eastern sensibilities in their stuff, but there's a little bit of like Western sensibilities within it. I think that's why maybe the Korean to American crossover has happened pretty, like there's a reason why Parasite won an Oscar, right, for Best Picture. And Train to Busan was a take on the zombie genre, a genre that I was starting to get tired of, to be honest. But Train to Busan found a way to make it really interesting. It had like really interesting, compelling characters. They had just really well done set pieces, and this sort of the way they were confined onto the train, I really liked it. So when there was a sequel announced, I was pretty excited. Had the same director and everything, so I was like, oh, cool. Nobody on the creative team really changed. Cool. And I finally watched it, and I would say this movie's not as good as the first Train to Busan. It still has some good action. It's still fairly fast-paced, and it kind of has like this interesting mixture of genres. I definitely noticed one of the things the East, or like Korea, seems to be comfortable with is mixing genres more. Like this movie's an action movie. It's kind of a drama movie. It's kind of like this like Mad Max post-apocalyptic movie. And it's kind of this interesting blend that you don't really see a lot in American films. I will say, for some of the negatives though, the main character, he's just not very compelling here. He's just kind of like bland soldier guy. I think the movie's a little too long. I mean, Korean films tend to be a little bit longer than American films, but I would say for here, this movie would have been benefited if they just chopped it down, because there's not really much meat here otherwise. And this movie also has like an odd vibe where they're supposed to be like in this post-apocalyptic section of Korea, but it feels like they're on a stage. I can't really explain it. Like the CW shows kind of have this effect too, where the way the environment looks, it's not as if they like went to Korea and like redressed a whole city block, right? It's kind of like they built a stage, put some stuff on it, and then they put a green screen around them, and they're just like, hey, we'll just fill it in computers. But I will say, when I notice it, it is distracting. So ultimately, I'm going to give Train to Busan a recommendation if you're looking for some good action horror. So let's go on to the next movie. Johnny Mnemonic. So, you know, I'm a 90s baby. I love 90s nostalgia. But I also have been kind of aware of this genre called cyberpunk that I've been kind of interested in. Of course, if you're involved in the gaming space at all, Cyberpunk 2077 was this really highly anticipated game. Unfortunately, that game apparently is a broken mess, and I feel really bad because the developer is getting a lot of crap on them right now. And it sucks because the cyberpunk genre is it's this genre basically, if you want to sum it up really easily, think of something like Blade Runner, where it's basically it's a place where the technology is high, but the quality of life is low. Like you're living in dungy, grungy kind of areas. Maybe there's like a police capital state that's always watching you all the time. So different from real life, right? And there's not a lot of nature. So think of Blade Runner. And I'm a big Keanu Reeves fan. In the 90s, I used to really love Keanu Reeves movies. And I remember watching this. This is kind of maybe a little less well-known movie. But I would say, because this has like prime Keanu, young Keanu, I didn't know it, actually has some Nick Cage in him. There were several moments in this movie where he just, because, you know, Keanu Reeves gets the criticism of being fairly mute and kind of range-wise limited, but in this movie, there's moments where he just goes full crazy Nick Cage, and I actually kind of wish Keanu Reeves would do more stuff like that. I also love the fact that this is before CGI got really, really good, so there's still a lot of practical sets, so you're seeing all these sort of cyberpunk interpretations, and that's one of the things I do kind of miss about the older movies, is that even if it was fake, they would just having a practical set, I think, helps the actors and helps you as an audience member, because you know it's real. Dina Meyer's in this movie. I'm not gonna lie, I've had a thing for Dina Meyer's. Curly hair. What can I say? It's a weakness, but she's not really given much to do. I think this movie's plot, I think all the stuff I like about this movie is like the nostalgia in the fact that it's in the cyberpunk genre, but this movie's not very good. The plot has way too many villains. It has about 3 or 4 villains happening at the same time. There's this romance plotline they try to build it to it. I'm not buying that whatsoever. And then in the third act of this film, it felt like they read a template of how to write what a story character arc is supposed to look like, and they just followed it without realizing if it made sense or not. So ultimately, I would say if you're looking for some nostalgic Keanu and maybe some 90s cyberpunk nostalgia, give a look to Johnny Mnemonic. Saint Oniisan. So I'm a big fan of this channel called Accent and Cinema, and he brought this movie back to my attention, and it's basically this animated film where the premise is Buddha and Jesus can come down to Earth for I think a year to kind of take a break from being, divine deities, and you're kind of following as they decide to vacation in Japan. And you just kind of watch as they just go on various adventures. The thing that really caught me about the movie is it has an interesting premise. And it's kind of just, and I was surprised, when you're watching this movie, it's just kind of a hangout film. Just kind of a hangout movie. You're just kind of watching Jesus and Buddha going on various adventures. They're a very interesting duo. I think whoever made this did a really good job of kind of interweaving the ideas and perceptions we have of Buddha and Jesus and our current day culture, and kind of reflecting that through some of these characters' behaviors, but also through contrasting and showing some of the ways that we maybe misinterpret those various things. This movie, and also if you're just a religious fan, you will have little inside jokes that you get about them. They have this thing about how whenever Jesus is suffering, his crown, his head starts bleeding a little bit, or whenever Buddha is trying to endure some hardship, he learns to disconnect and just go into the mindfulness. And I would say this movie ultimately has a pretty heartwarming message, and it definitely made me want to go to Japan. I do think if I were to give one criticism of the movie, I think this movie could have been shorter. This maybe would have benefited from being a movie that was maybe an hour, because there's definitely a certain point where I was starting to get it's getting a little tired of the film. But hey, if you're looking for a new maybe holiday classic, Christmas holiday, give Saint Oniisan a watch. All right, Takeshi 6ix9ine, the Saga of Danny Hernandez. So if you're anyone on the internet, you are aware of who Takeshi 6ix9ine is. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not really a fan of his. I think he's one of those guys. I think he is a perfect example of how the internet's ability to help people attain fame, it really shows that you don't necessarily have to be talented. There's some people who will work to have a skill to be famous, and there's some other people who, if they can't be famous through traditional means, they'll usually just become infamous. And he's definitely somebody who kind of blurs that line. So Takeshi 6ix9ine has had a pretty crazy story where he rose up in the rap game really fast by being very controversial, calling people out, doing problematic things. And then the big thing that happened to him is he ended up doing a stint in jail because he was affiliated with a blood gang and then snitched on them to get a reduced sentence. So if you know, in hip hop culture is very tied to street culture. I'm not someone from this kind of culture, but I'm tied to it and whatnot, in tiny little bits, and not directly. Let's be real, I grew up middle class comfortably. I'm privileged. But yeah, so in that kind of street culture, it is seen as one of the worst things you can do is basically be a snitch to the police. Because if you know the relationship between most people of color and the police, it's not very good. But this guy, Takeshi 6ix9ine, he snitched on them. So this documentary came out. I'm going to definitely say one of the things that is kind of a weakness is I think this documentary coming out is a little too soon. Because Takeshi 6ix9ine is still, we're only a year or two, maybe even away from some of these events, and he's still doing his thing, whatever that could be. And also the fact that they don't interview Takeshi 6ix9ine. Now, of course, there may be circumstances. I heard there's this new Showtime show that's kind of doing the same thing as this documentary, except they actually have interviews with Takeshi, which, to be real, I kind of feel like that's probably going to be the better one to watch. But hey, if you don't want to wait and you're impatient, you want to watch something, this is on Hulu. I will say, when you watch this documentary, when you see the tightrope Takeshi 6ix9ine was walking, man, he had so many different gang people who were after him. And the fact that he's now branded a snitch, I'm not gonna lie, I'm worried that the story of Takeshi 69 is going to end in tragedy, because he is a troll. Like, he is living that definition of it's better to burn out than to fade away, because he has so many people after him. But I couldn't help but think, because when you're watching this thing and seeing all the close calls he gets into that could have got him killed, and when he didn't, this dude must have the luck of fortune from MGS2. Like when you watch this documentary, you're gonna know what I mean. But yes, if you're looking for something about this guy, like, I use this kind of movie to kind of give me like a brief fill-in of, okay, who is this guy in like an hour and a half? Tell me. This is on Hulu. Give it a watch. All right, let's go back into a little bit of this 90s nostalgia with a Goofy movie. So I'm not gonna lie, even though I'm a 90s kid, there are certain sections of 90s culture that unfortunately I have no ties to. Like, I'm gonna admit to y'all right now, I've never watched The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I've maybe seen like an episode or two. I don't know what it was. There was something about when these 90s sitcoms were playing on like Nick at Night and whatever. I just didn't want to watch them. I just was like, this is old, and kind of wish I'd gone back now. So a Goofy movie is one of those. I remember that this would come on the Disney Channel, and I don't know if y'all remember this, the people who were around before we kind of had the internet and really good satellite cable. There was a lot of times where when you were a kid, there just would be nothing on that you wanted to watch, so you would just keep it on a channel that just had something that you maybe wanted to have in the background. And this is one of the movies that I definitely remember I just kind of had. But I don't know, I kind of had this weird thing with Goofy where I was only really into Mickey when it came to Disney, so I just kind of seen Goofy as B-list compared to Mickey. That is until, of course, my boy Goofy had my back in both of the Kingdom Hearts games I played. He was there with me and Sora and Donald. You ain't B-list to me no more, Goofy. I appreciate you. But let's be real. The song in this movie, the like kind of Michael Jackson-esque song, the song Eye to Eye, which, hey, if you want some nostalgia, it is on Spotify. That song slaps. That song is dope. I would legitimately play that song. If I was a DJ and I knew I was in a room, excuse me, with some 90s people, I would put that song on, and I bet it would go over fairly well. I will say this movie does have a pretty heartwarming message, parent-child message. I definitely, found myself getting a little choked up, Disney doing as they do, powering themselves through the tears, through the joy of children and the nostalgic tears of parents. This movie got some tears for me. I can finally buy that Powerline shirt now. There was a point where there was a 90s skate night, and I wanted to buy the Powerline shirt, but I just played this scenario out where if someone asked me, oh man, what's your favorite part of the Goofy movie? And I hadn't seen the movie at that point, that I would be fake. But now that I've seen the movie, I can indulge in that nostalgia. And also, I'm gonna say ultimately with the Goofy movie, it definitely made me want to watch some Disney films that I skipped either in my childhood or as I started hitting my teenage years, as all teenagers do, where you're like, I don't want to watch this children's stuff anymore. I'm gonna go back and watch some Disney films, and I think I'm glad the Goofy movie set me on that path. And now on to the final piece of entertainment that changes the formula up a little bit. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. So I know what you're thinking. You're going, wait, Najee, you've only ever talked about movies in this, but I'm changing it up now. I'm throwing video games up here. So I don't know if any of y'all know, I really love video games, but unfortunately I would say within the maybe last five-ish years, I've been kind of drifting away from video games. Of course, I always stay informed on it. I watch a bunch of YouTube videos, and I love watching, being still kind of in the gaming culture. I just stopped playing it because, unfortunately, games take a lot of time. They take up a lot of time, and I'm trying to get my life together, and I realized some stuff had to give. So video games had to give a little bit in my life. But recently, my friend bought me this game, and I decided to play it, and I'm really glad that I did. This game, I know there's a lot of controversy with the Star Wars property now that Disney acquired it. The trilogy, the newest trilogy they just did not go over as well as maybe Disney wanted. I think they goofed up with their caving into the fans, whining about Jedi, The Last Jedi. But I would say their video games are rock solid. So I played this game. I think this game takes place during an interesting time in the Star Wars universe where it's taking place after the Clone Wars, but before Star Wars A New Hope. So you're kind of in this, it's kind of the same time period, I think, as something like The Mandalorian. And I find that time period kind of interesting for Star Wars. So I'm glad I had a game where I got to live out my Jedi dreams. I think the various worlds you visit in this game, they feel very Star Wars. It definitely put in this, I think they captured the sense of sort of adventure of, you know, oh man, you're in space, you're on all these different planets. Like, what different creatures are going to be there? What different worlds are going to be there? And I think this game captures that pretty well. I'm a fan of Neversoft games, and Neversoft games are well known for making combat that is challenging but rewarding through, it's not just a simple hack and slash. You're not just going to be able to, this is not going to be like Star Wars The Force Unleashed where you're just hacking through a bunch of stormtroopers. The combat is challenging. You have to take every enemy as a serious threat, and I enjoyed that challenge. I also just thought the boss characters, the second sister, her costume design was so cool. I think the video games low-key have some of the best Star Wars storylines and some of the best Star Wars designs, and I enjoyed looking at them. And I would say I was surprised that the story for this is pretty solid, and the crew that you travel with, they do a pretty good job of fleshing them out. I would get into conversations with characters, conversations that aren't mandatory. You don't have to do these, but I would like talking to these characters, just hearing their viewpoints on the actions I was taking and the kind of world we're in, and just getting little distinct stuff about their character. So if you're looking for a reason to get back into video games and you're a Star Wars fan, I would recommend Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. All right, so that's it for March 2021. That's what I was watching. If you've enjoyed any of these things and you have any thoughts, leave a comment down below. And if you dug this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And until next month, at least for this installment of the Watch List, I'll see y'all later.